I won't drive that stake, Nehemiah Dalton said, though his son could not take his eyes off the milk in Nervie Hargrove's pail. Nervie stood behind a half-open gate, still smiling at Molly as the child reached toward the milk. Then Nehemiah scraped the mud from the post and uncovered Lon Calhoun's burned hook brand. Nervie kept the smile for the children, but her eyes went cold and her hand tightened on the iron latch. Nehemiah understood the bargain might cost more than hunger. The late autumn sun lay low over the Dakota plains. Behind Nervie, cows shifted near the barn, sheep crowded the windbreak, and a black and white dog watched the strangers with more welcome than its mistress dared show. Molly reached toward the white froth trembling at the rim of the pail. Nehemiah caught her wrist gently and tucked her hand against his coat. "Not yet, little bird." He had walked 12 miles with both children and one bedroll. Every hollow place in him ached for food, but he would not teach them to take what he had not earned. Nervie looked from his worn boots to Eli's thin face. The warmth in her smile remained for the children, but her assessing gaze stayed on Nehemiah. "The provisioner said you wanted winter work," she said. "He did not say you were bringing a family." "He may have thought you'd say no." "Would he have been wrong?" Nehemiah looked at the branded wood between them. "Depends whether you want a hungry man who nods or an honest one who causes trouble before supper." Her mouth almost moved. Not quite a broader smile, not quite anger. She had offered a room with a stove, 3 meals a day, and milk for the children, if he fenced the eastern pasture before the first hard snow. The lumber waited beside the boundary. A simpler man would have driven every post, eaten his fill, and thanked heaven for warmth. But Nehemiah knew Calhoun's mark. He had bled under it. "If I set this wood in your ground," he said, "Calhoun can claim you accepted his line. He'll say the pasture was always his." Nervie glanced toward the eastern slope, where the grass held green longer around the spring. Without that water, her sheep would not last the winter. "You expect me to trust a stranger who refuses the first job I give him?" "No, ma'am. I expect you to look before you lose land." Eli reached into his oversized coat, pulled out the crumbled heel of bread he had saved since morning, and held it through the gate. "You can have it," he whispered to Nervie. "If you're hungry too." Nehemiah closed his eyes for half a breath. The boy had inherited generosity before Nehemiah had managed to provide enough for himself. Nervie stared at the dry bread. Something in her shoulders gave way. She pushed the gate open and stepped aside. "You have 3 minutes to explain the brand," she said, "and those children are not standing in the wind while you do it." The dog rose and led them toward the feed shed, as if the matter were settled. The shed joined the south wall of the barn and smelled of clover leather and old smoke. Nervie lit a kerosene lamp, then set the milk pail on a bench. She found a small ledger opened to a clean page and drew a line down the center. 3 days, she said. If your warning proves false, you leave before the storm. Until then, room, board, milk, and wages against the work. I write every hour. No favors, no misunderstandings. Nehemiah understood the language of a ledger. It kept kindness from pretending to be ownership. Yes, ma'am. She poured milk into 2 tin cups. Molly drank with both hands around hers, eyes closing in bliss. Eli tried to sip slowly, failed, and came up with a white mustache. Nervie looked away too late to hide a smile. Then she brought cornbread and salted beef. Nehemiah divided his portion between the children. There is more in the pot, she said. I ate at the stage stop. The lie came out flat and practiced. Nervie's gaze dropped to the sharp line of his cheek, then returned to the ledger. She did not expose him. Instead, she cut another piece of cornbread, put it beside his hand, and wrote something on the page. "What did you mark?" he asked. "Waste," she said. "Bread goes stale faster when a proud man watches it." He looked at her. She kept her eyes on the pencil, but the corner of her mouth had betrayed her. He ate. The next morning, silver frost lay over the eastern pasture. Nervie expected fence posts. Nehemiah could tell by the way she stood at the barn door, arms folded, chin high. Instead, she found him walking the boundary with Eli, checking the soil around every old marker. Molly sat on an upturned bucket near the dog and pointed at the sheep. "The cows in coats are cold, Papa." "They're sheep, little bird. Cold sheep cows." The dog sneezed as if agreeing. Nervie came across the grass with purpose in every step. "You have not driven one post." "No, ma'am." "That answer is becoming expensive." He knelt at a patch where frost had lifted the earth. "Then this may save you money." He dug with his fingers and pulled up a half-buried stake. The soil around it was loose and dark. He wiped the wood clean. Calhoun's hook brand showed at the base. Eli crouched beside him. "Was it hiding?" "It was pretending," Nehemiah said. He turned the stake so Nervie could see the shallow knife cuts near the brand, 2 short marks and 1 long. "I made those tallies," he said. "Every man in Calhoun's Montana camp cut his own mark so the foreman could count our pieces. This wood was stacked there last spring. It was not standing on your farm 3 years ago." Nervie looked toward the spring at the bottom of the slope. Several more stakes formed a crooked line around it. "They buried them before the freeze," Nehemiah continued. "Come thaw, Calhoun would swear the ground settled around an old boundary." "How do you know his tricks?" Nehemiah hated the answer, because it still carried the taste of being trapped. "I worked his camp 4 months. He paid in food and tools, then charged twice their worth in his book. A man could work from dark to dark and owe more by supper. He expected pity. Pity always made a man smaller than hunger did. Nervie gave him none." She took the stake, studied the marks, and handed it back. "Pull this one," she said. "Leave the others where they lie. We count every piece before noon, and no one touches the spring." It was not trust. It was a measured choice. Nehemiah respected it more. By midday, they had found 11 false markers. Nervie recorded each one, while Eli carried twine, and Molly followed Shep, collecting pebbles for reasons known only to herself. That afternoon, hoofbeats sounded in the yard. Lon Calhoun rode in on a heavy roan wrapped in a dark wool coat too fine for honest work. Nehemiah was forking hay near the barn. He did not move closer, though every old scar in him seemed to wake. Calhoun tipped his hat to Nervie. "Mrs. Hargrove, winter is near. I hear you found yourself a hand." Nervie stood on the porch. "I found work that needs doing." Calhoun's eyes slid to Nehemiah. "That one eats more than he earns." Nehemiah tightened his grip on the fork. For one hot second, he pictured Calhoun in the dirt. Then he saw Eli near the shed, watching. A fist might satisfy a man and still leave his children fatherless by nightfall. He set the fork against the wall. Calhoun noticed the restraint and mistook it for fear. "I will buy your flock now," he told Nervie. "Fair price. Saves you from feeding them through a bad season." "The flock is not for sale. The eastern water may not be yours much longer." Nervie did not look at Nehemiah for rescue. She stepped down from the porch and stopped close enough to Calhoun's horse that the animal tossed its head. "My husband bought lumber from you," she said. "He did not sell you my spring. Bring a surveyor or stay off my grass." Calhoun's smile thinned. A widow should be careful whose word she borrows. She is using her own, Nehemiah said. It was the only sentence he allowed himself. Calhoun turned his gaze on him. You will not find another day's wage in this territory if you make an enemy of me. Nehemiah felt the threat land where Calhoun intended, on Molly's milk, Eli's supper, the roof above them. He still answered, Then I had best make these 3 days useful. After Calhoun rode away, Nervie remained in the yard until the sound of hooves vanished. You could have struck him, she said, without turning. I wanted to. I know. Nehemiah waited for blame. She faced him. Thank you for remembering your children before your pride. No one had ever named restraint as strength before. The words unsettled him more than praise should have. The 3-day trial ended under a sky the color of pewter. Nervie closed the ledger after supper. You can stay until the wool market, she said. Only because the storm is coming, and I have no other hand. I reckon your warm welcome will heat the shed by itself. Her eyes narrowed. Then she caught the dry edge in his voice and looked away, but not before he saw amusement break through. They fell into a rhythm made of friction work and things neither one admitted noticing. Nervie rose before dawn. Nehemiah began rising earlier. She went to lift a milk can and found it already on the wagon. He went to split kindling and found his torn glove mended with small, stubborn stitches. Neither thanked the other properly. At supper, she would set an extra slice of bread on the porch. Scraps for Shep, she announced. The dog stole the bacon whenever there was any, but Nehemiah always found the bread wrapped in cloth beneath the plate. The first time he left half for the morning. The second time, he ate it all. The third time, he carried the empty plate into the kitchen instead of leaving it outside. Nervie looked at the plate, then at him. Shep finally learned manners. No, ma'am. He remains a thief. The dog thumped his tail against the floor. One afternoon, they stretched a canvas cover over the hay. The wind caught it hard enough to jerk Nervie off balance. Nehemiah reached past her for the rope, his chest brushing her shoulder. She went still. He did too. She smelled of cold air wool and the soap she used on the milk pails. He became sharply aware of the breadth of his hand beside hers and of how much he wanted to leave it there. Wanting had been a dangerous habit since his wife died. A man with 2 children could not afford to mistake shelter for invitation. He stepped back first. Eli, holding the other end of the rope, looked between them. Who is the boss of the hay? Nehemiah and Nervie pointed at Nervie at the same time. Eli nodded, as if the answer confirmed a serious law of nature. Nervie laughed. The sound came bright and unguarded across the gray yard. Nehemiah forgot the rope for half a second and watched her. He had not known a laugh could make a farm look less lonely. The windmill pump froze 2 mornings later. Nehemiah found Nervie milking in the barn. He did not take the tools without asking. The pump is locked in ice, he said. I can thaw it or I can move the sheep to the lower pen. Which comes first? She glanced at him over the cow's flank. You know which comes first. I know what I would choose. It is not my farm. For a moment she said nothing. Then she reached into her apron and gave him the iron key to the feed shed. Thaw the pump. Use whatever coal you need. The key was heavy in his palm. Grain tools, seed, and winter stores lay behind that lock. He closed his fingers around it without pretending the gesture meant less than it did. Yes, ma'am. The next morning she asked for the key back in a voice brisk enough to cut rope. He gave it to her at once. Relief crossed her face before she hid it. Nehemiah understood then that trust frightened her more than labor ever had. He also understood he wanted to become a man she did not have to fear trusting. The thought was foolish, private, and impossible to set down in any ledger. The cold deepened. Frost clung to the sheep's wool, and 2 weaker ewes began stumbling in the frozen ruts. Nervie decided to sort the flock in one day. She worked too fast. Her bare fingers reddened, and her breathing grew ragged. Nehemiah watched her fight a ewe as if force could bargain with winter. He stepped into the pen and took the animal's weight from the other side. "Let her lean against your leg," he said. "Do not carry what will stand if you give it balance." "I have handled livestock before." "Cows, yes. Sheep hold grudges smaller and meaner." The ewe kicked his shin as if proving the point. Nervie's mouth twitched. For 2 hours he showed her how to check hooves, part wet wool, and turn a sheep without frightening it. He kept his hands near hers, but never over them. When she found the rhythm, he stepped back and let her work. By late afternoon the wind sharpened. Nervie's hands shook. She dropped the shears and bent for them. Nehemiah put his boot on the handle. "Move your foot." "No, I am not finished. The flock needs the woman who feeds it alive tomorrow." Her eyes flashed. "You do not decide when I stop." He heard the warning beneath the words. He had crossed from help into command, the very thing he had promised himself not to do. Nehemiah lifted his boot. "You are right." She reached for the shears. "But if you choose to keep working," he said, "I will stand here and be angry at you until one of us freezes." That sounds like a poor use of wages. "It is the first work today I am willing to do badly." For a breath, she held his gaze. Then a shiver ran through her so hard her shoulders jerked. She set the shears on the fence rail. "Open the barn." He did. No triumph, no lecture. Together they moved the remaining sheep inside. That evening, the extra plate did not wait on the porch. When Nehemiah brought the children for milk, 4 bowls sat on the kitchen table. He stopped in the doorway. Nervie ladled stew without looking at him. "The wind is stealing heat every time that door opens." "Sit down before you cost me firewood." He guided Eli and Molly to their chairs, but remained standing. Nervie hooked the toe of her boot around the 4th chair and dragged it away from the table with a scrape. Nehemiah sat. Eli quietly traded his large bowl for his father's smaller one. Nervie saw. She said nothing. She filled Nehemiah's bowl first, putting in enough beef and potatoes that no child had to rescue him from hunger. He looked down at the stew. "I cannot pay extra for this." "Then eat slowly and make it troublesome to collect." He did not smile, but warmth pressed painfully against his ribs. 2 nights later, the lead ewe went into hard labor. Nervie and Nehemiah worked in the barn for hours, but the lamb was turned wrong and could not be saved. Near midnight, the ewe died too. Nervie stood in the ruined straw, her face empty with exhaustion. "I need to check the water in the other stalls," she said. She took 1 step and folded. Nehemiah caught her before she struck the floor. He lowered her against a bale, then rested one hand on her shoulder. Her whole body trembled. He started to pull away, afraid comfort might become another thing he took without leave. Her fingers closed around his wrist. She did not draw him nearer. She only kept his hand where it was. Nehemiah sat beside her in the hay. The barn waited. The chores waited. For once, neither of them tried to purchase the right to remain standing. After a while, she said, "My husband used to tell me the farm would forgive one bad day. Was he right?" "No," her voice cracked, then steadied. "But sometimes it gives you another morning." Nehemiah looked at the dead ewe, then at the woman beside him. "Then we will meet it in the morning." "We." The word left him before caution could stop it. Nervie's grip tightened once around his wrist. she heard it. The wool market at the fort was 4 days away. The next morning, Nervie opened the ledger and wrote the date in dark pencil. "When I decide whether to sell the flock or keep it through winter," she said, "will you still be here?" Nehemiah stacked firewood beside the stove so he would not have to face her too quickly. He could answer as a hired man. He could promise labor through the market and leave himself a road out. That was the sensible thing. Yet the thought of the farm without her, voice in the barn, without her dry remarks over supper, left the coming winter feeling colder than any road. "The choice about the flock is yours," he said. "Where I am depends on whether I can stop acting like a pair of hands anyone may replace." Silence held between them. He turned. Nervie was watching him, the pencil motionless above the page. "And can you?" she asked. "Not all at once." Her expression softened. "Good. I distrust miracles." There was not a promise. It was more dangerous than one, because it left room for hope. The fort market crowded the yard beside the freight sheds with wagons, buyers, and bleating sheep. Nervie's wool lay in clean, tight bales. Nehemiah stood near the wagon wheel with Eli, while Molly slept under quilts in the bed of the wagon. Lon Calhoun arrived with 2 men. He tore a handful of wool from a bale and dropped it in the mud. "Burrs, weak fiber, grazed on disputed ground besides." Buyers who had been approaching slowed. Nervie climbed down from the wagon. "Pick that up!" Calhoun smiled. "No buyer will touch it once I file my claim." The fear in Nehemiah rose, fast and familiar. Calhoun knew how to make hunger stand in front of a man like a loaded gun. Then Calhoun drew a roll of greenbacks from his coat. "Dalton, winter foreman, double wage, beef for the children. You need only tell the surveyor that those stakes stood on Hargrove land 3 years ago." The money was enough to carry Eli and Molly through more than one winter. Nehemiah looked at his son. Eli's face was pale, but he did not plead. Nervie did not plead either. That was the cruelty of the choice. No one would stop him from calling betrayal duty. Nehemiah stepped toward Calhoun. The other men shifted, expecting a blow. He passed the money without touching it, and moved into the open space between the wagons. "I cut those stakes in Montana last spring," he called. His voice carried over the market. "My knife marks are on the bases. 2 shortcuts and 1 long. Dig them up before you buy Calhoun's claim." Calhoun's face darkened. "You lying stray." Nehemiah turned on him then, anger hot but leashed. "You kept men hungry, so they would owe you for eating. You will not use my children to make me help you do the same to her." For one breath, the market went still. Calhoun shoved him in the chest. Nehemiah staggered half a step, his fists closed. He could have answered. He wanted to. Then Nervie's voice came clear beside him. "Do not dirty your hands on my account." Not a command to be harmless, a reminder of what mattered. Nehemiah opened his fists and stepped between Calhoun and the wagon blocking the second shove without striking back. "You heard her claim," he said to the buyers. "Now hear the quality from the woman who raised the flock." Then he moved aside. Nervie bent, picked the wool from the mud, and faced the crowd. She pulled a clean lock from another bale and stretched it beneath the winter light. "Long staple," she said. "Clean, skirted fleece. The lower pasture gives better wool than Calhoun wants you to know. I set the price. Any man who fears a false boundary may keep walking." One buyer stepped forward, then another. By mid-afternoon, every bale had sold at a fair price. Nehemiah had protected her right to speak. Nervie had won the sale with her own work. The difference mattered to him. As they loaded the empty wagon, she handed him the reins. "What do you choose next?" she asked. He understood the gift she had asked. What he chose, not what work he could do. I choose to go home, he said. Her eyes warmed. Then drive us there. He carried that word all the way across the plains. That evening, Nervie brought him into the small parlour she used as an office. She spread a hand-drawn map of the farm over the desk. I need enough hay for the weakest ewes and room in the lower barn, she said. I know what I can afford. I want your judgment on what the flock can bear. Nehemiah leaned over the map beside her. Their shoulders touched. Neither moved away. They planned the winter together. He gave no orders, and she admitted when she needed him. When they disagreed, the animals and the numbers decided the matter. The next day, Nervie's cousin Cora arrived from the fort, with a spinning wheel tied to her wagon, and an expression sour enough to curdle fresh milk. Cora had advised Nervie to sell after her husband's death. She said so again before removing her gloves. Nervie answered, You may repeat it while helping me spin blankets. Cora looked toward Nehemiah. For the children. For the children, Nervie said. They worked all afternoon with the first clean fleece. When Nehemiah entered the shed after dark, 2 thick wool blankets lay across Eli's and Molly's cots. His first thought was how many night chores would pay for them. His mouth opened before he could stop it. Then he saw Nervie in the doorway. No ledger, no pencil. Only a quiet question on her face. Would he turn care into debt again? Nehemiah ran one hand over the blanket. Thank you. They will be warm. The words cost him more courage than refusing Calhoun's money. Nervie nodded once. You are welcome. Cora, standing behind her, whispered loudly, He can be taught. Nehemiah glanced at her. So I have been warned. Cora's laugh filled the shed. Even Nervie joined it. After supper, Nehemiah went to check the front gate. The sky had bruised purple and snow pressed low over the plains. Nervie followed with the lantern. He secured the latch. You can lock it tonight. She stood on the other side of the gate from him, just as she had the first evening. This time, there was no milk pail between them, no bargain waiting to be named. No, she said. Do not lock it. Not while you are learning how to stay. The words struck too close. Nehemiah rested his hand on the top rail. I am trying. I know. She placed her hand beside his, not touching, but near enough that he felt the warmth through the cold iron of the lantern handle. The blizzard came the next afternoon. Snow swallowed the eastern pasture and erased the road to the fort. For 3 hours, Nehemiah, Nervie, Cora, and Shep fought the drifts. They hauled the last sheep into the main barn, braced the doors, and carried wood to the porch. Eli filled lamps and kept Molly away from the stove with the grave importance of a deputy. By the time Nehemiah dragged the last armload onto the porch, his fingers were so numb he struck the latch twice before he found it. Ice had stiffened the collar against his throat, and each breath cut behind his ribs. By dusk, the farmhouse held against the wind. Nervie put her mother's beef stew on the stove, a dish she had not made since her husband died. Nehemiah stood nearby with snow melting from his hair and watched her set 5 bowls on the table. One bowl waited at the far end opposite her own. Nervie took the leather ledger from the shelf. She opened to the page bearing his name and drew a firm line to the words, Room and board until wool market. The contract is finished, she said. Nehemiah went still. For one terrible second, the room changed back into every place that had ever let him stay, only while his back held out. Nervie saw it. She closed the ledger and stepped around the table. I am not dismissing you. He could not answer. I do not want a hired hand through winter, she continued. Her voice trembled once, then steadied. I want you here after the thaw. Not because you can mend a pump or turn a sheep. I want the man who lets my choices remain mine. I want the father who gives away his supper and is finally learning to eat. I want you, Nehemiah, if you can choose me without owing me. The wind struck the walls. Inside, no one moved. Nehemiah reached into his coat and took out the small leather pouch that held his last silver dollars. He had kept them for a stage ticket, in case she sent him away. He set the pouch on the table, but did not push it toward her. I came here to trade work for food, he said. Some part of me still thinks a man must earn every place he is allowed to stand. Nervie waited. She did not rescue him from the sentence. He looked at the children at Cora, pretending great interest in the stew, then back at Nervie. I want every winter after this one to have you in it. But I need to hear one thing plain. What thing? Ask me to stay as Nehemiah, not as your hand. Nervie crossed the space between them. She took both his rough hands in hers. Stay, Nehemiah, she said. Stand beside me, because I choose you, and because you choose me. His throat tightened. Then I am staying. He turned one hand beneath hers and laced their fingers together. No ledger could hold the weight of that answer. Molly clapped because everyone else was silent. Eli smiled into his bowl. Cora tasted the stew and, You still put too much salt in it, Nervie, just as you did when we were girls. Nervie half offended and relieved. Nehemiah joined her. The sound rose against the blizzard and made the house feel chosen. A week later, when the road to the fort opened, the territorial surveyor rode out with Cora and Calhoun's freight entries tucked inside his leather case. In the eastern pasture, he turned each pulled stake in his gloved hands, matched Nehemiah's too short one long tally to the wood, then cut through the mud on one buried end and exposed pale, unweathered grain. He compared the shipment dates with Calhoun's claim and wrote that the alleged boundary could not predate the timber. Before mounting his horse, he refused to certify Calhoun's line. Buyers who had once feared Calhoun began questioning the debts in his other ledgers. The surveyor's notes confirmed what the market had already decided about the two people on Hargrove land. Neither would be owned by another person's book. The real victory came on a clear morning beside the eastern pasture. Nehemiah and Eli had pulled every burned stake from the soil. Nervie carried a freshly planed oak board, while Molly followed with a fistful of nails, and Shep tried to steal one from her mitten. Painted across the board were the words, Hargrove Winter Dairy and Wool. Below, in smaller letters, Nervie had added, Kept by Nervie Hargrove and Nehemiah Dalton. Nehemiah read the second line twice. This does not change the deed, Nervie said. The farm remains mine. As it should. It does change who I intend to build it with. She handed him the iron hammer. He took it, then offered the board back. Where do you want the last nail? Nervie stepped close, her shoulder settling against his chest. Where can you reach it without standing in front of me? He smiled. That sounds like a rule worth keeping. Together they raised the sign. Nervie held the oak steady. Nehemiah drove the nail. Then he passed her the hammer, and she struck it once more, setting it firm. Inside the fence, Eli and Molly chased Shep through the frost-tipped grass. The sheep crowded the lower field. The windmill turned above the barn. On the top rail of the gate sat the tin milk pail from the evening they met. It waited to be filled again, but the ledger remained closed inside the house. This time, when Nervie opened the gate, Nehemiah was already home.